an absolute pleasure to be here today to present at this event. It's a particularly pleasing time for me to be here because this event is arranged and organized by students of the École des Mines, one of which I had the honor to teach, actually, who was Francois, who just introduced me. Thank you very, very much for that, and it's always a pleasure to see familiar faces again. Yes, my affiliation is with the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom, and I run the program focusing on the subject that we are going to be presenting today. I have special areas of research and special areas of interest that really involve many interdisciplinary areas, including cloud computing and e-business systems and strategies. This is something that I have aligned today with a very interesting subject and topic that we have of knowledge and sharing knowledge. So, what is the scope of my presentation? We are going to look at how cloud computing really does enable a paradigm shift into the way that we have been traditionally interacting with systems. Enterprise systems are those systems that companies use. They use them to enable their operations. We are going to have a small focus on how the supply chains of these companies use such systems to integrate and to share things like knowledge and to share things like value. We're going to review the models that we use to support the new concept of open innovation. For those of you who know what open innovation is, this is a new dimension in the sharing and attaining of knowledge, and it is one of the areas that we extensively research. We are going to look at new opportunities and how people like SMEs have to work closer and better in order to be more collaborative, in order to be more competitive. Because in this global, very competitive environment that we find ourselves in, we always have to find new ways, and the power of information technology in defining new methods that we interact is huge. So, in the form of a scope for this presentation, what I would like to propose is that we address 4 key questions. These 4 key questions will have a specific response within the body of this presentation, and we will focus on cloud computing, ERP in turbulent times, the investment that we need to do and is required of us in order to address the needs of enterprises and the extended enterprise, which includes, of course, all those people that are outside the boundaries of the typical system. The new ERP cost structures, this is where we start looking at the advantages of cloud computing, how the costs of enterprise information management can be huge to some organizations, and why new paradigms based on cloud can offer very plausible solutions, and how ERP systems of the future will change and align themselves with this evolution or revolution, really, in what we call open networking structures. The way that we exchange information, of course, is changing. Everybody holds mobile devices and smart devices that we use to exchange information, and how these will also offer opportunities for us for integration and also for knowledge sharing. So, unfortunately, here we have a dark cloud, and this is representative of the current environment that we find ourselves in. We do have a turbulent environment. If you excuse the pun in the slide, it is all up in the air at the moment, and it is very representative of cloud computing. But we have some distinct effects of such turbulent environments. We have uncertainty. We have spending caps or spending budget cuts on equipment that is aimed at the enterprise integration, like IT spending budget cuts. We have systems life cycles of equipment that spans way beyond the ones that we planned to have. So we have a proliferation of legacy systems, older systems that are still there at the heart of enterprises, working very, very hard, but were nonetheless due to be replaced. And we have aggressive optimization drives and demands. So companies are demanding much, much more from their information infrastructures at the moment. And they want to see a distinct return on investment. So why we turn to cloud for some of those answers, we will explain in the following slides. We also have different types of data information from the types and data information we all are accustomed to having. The nature of this information is very, very different. And also the volume of this information is different. And of course, we question what kind of information we can use and share in enterprises, and which information is credible and which information is workable. And this has also arisen from the huge growth in social networking, and ERP vendors are currently looking at ways to capitalize on these growths and to integrate such functionality in their systems. We also need to protect such information. The information that we do use and the information that we have in our core environments, there is a huge need to look after it and use it wisely. While we share this knowledge, we need to make sure that it is protected adequately. So knowledge in enterprise systems. We need to understand how we can harass knowledge, because knowledge in information systems is power. So data, knowledge, visibility, integration, alignment, all of these things are based on the way that we interact with knowledge. And we have come to understand the power that sharing knowledge can give us. So instead of having very closed information structures, we have seen through things like open innovation, the power that open structures can offer companies. Finally, we look at reviewing the role of the key players and what their positions are. And this is a huge reshuffling, especially in turbulent times. We look at each of our positions, and this is not only to say that the position of somebody like an SME needs to be reevaluated, but also the position of those very strong entities in business, very strong organizations. They might find themselves isolated. More importantly, where we have smaller people in this dynamic equation like SMEs, we have found that they have identified a need to cluster specifically their resources in order to be able to be more competitive. So we have within the SMEs a drive to cluster resources, including that of information systems. They don't have a chance. They have to do that in order to be competitive and survive. We also identify one key element here, and that is, through the research, we have found a key underrepresentation of technologies within SMEs. In other words, SMEs are slow behind the power curve to pick up and utilize some of these technologies. And of course, the reason for that is self-evident. Sometimes they're expensive, sometimes the knowledge curve is too steep, and most of the times, frankly, they have more important things to do, like run a business, instead of try and invest hugely and try and understand what the next big thing will be. And sometimes that's where we come into play and we help them. So enterprise resources planning systems, well, what can I say? In the past, huge monolithic structures. We had really expensive systems that were bound to the borders of organizations. So the enterprise used to, if you like, hardwire an ERP system within it. The knowledge would reside within that company. But when we started breaking down the barriers of these enterprises, we saw that, hey, we have suppliers and suppliers. So how do we share in this knowledge? And how do we take advantage of it? So we looked at systematically including them in this sharing of knowledge. We had large monolithic systems, lack of distributed computing, and very prescriptive boundaries, and expensive. But from enterprise tier 1 to enterprise tier 2, which is mid-market, to enterprise tier 3, which is lower to mid-market, we started seeing a strange phenomenon, where some vendors were dominating the top echelon. For example, you can see some very familiar names at the top. We started seeing that they are also then trying to move into the other tiers, into the mid-market, into the lower market segments. And that perhaps can account for why some of these very large information technology system vendors have managed not only to survive, but also to grow into these other markets. So they've expanded in order to gain market share. And the leading provider at the moment, with a market share of 25.5%, based on revenues for the year 2011, has in the first, second, and third tier markets a distinct offering. So it's not unusual to see why they're doing that. And as a matter of fact, that same vendor now has a cloud-based offering, which they term business by design, for those of you perhaps familiar with it, which focuses primarily and exclusively on the cloud-based applications. Knowledge-based systems. These ERP systems, as they were, we discovered that they were harboring knowledge. There was lots and lots of knowledge in these systems. And we focused on that knowledge, and we used that knowledge to have an integrated view of the environment in which these systems function. But we identified that this knowledge was also power, and we should really focus on sharing some of that power and making that visible to others. So we started collaborating closer with our suppliers and our supply chain and sharing this knowledge to enable them to come up to speed. I had the pleasure of visiting one such company yesterday with another colleague, and the power of sharing this knowledge was evident during that visit, and the need to do that. The need to do that in a structure which we call open innovation. Open innovation is based on the work of Henry Chesper over at Henley in the United States. And really what we're looking at here is a type of shared value that comes from contribution of knowledge and information for all of us to use and all of us to benefit from. So here we are then looking for the next wave of competitive advantage. And what we hope is that this next wave will not come in the form of a tsunami. Competitive advantage is what we always strive for. And we have various methods that we are focusing on at the moment, like things focused on collaboration to innovation, cloud computing, and big data. But let's talk a little bit closer about cloud computing. This market is huge, and I think it's quite unique because in spite of the turbulent environment we live in, they show year-on-year growth figures of nearly 31%. That is quite unusual. The cloud software market, we show figures of almost $23 billion. This is a huge wave. The growth, according to Gartner, we are looking at figures of expected generation, 177 billion for the year 2015. And by 2016, according to IDC, for every £5 that are spent on software, $1 will go directly to cloud software applications. So the adaptation of cloud computing, how widely adapted is it? How widely do we use this? In a study that was carried out by KPMG, 900 participants in the year 2011, over 15 countries that were sampled, in excess of 80% of those companies using some form of cloud-based computing application. So, in terms of ERP, well, if we accept that ERP is part of a company's core business, it's a core information system. We have 1 in 10 companies currently running enterprise ERP systems based on the cloud. And you'll be quite surprised at some of the very, very large names that are using it. So, what is it and how does it work? Well, it's based on what we call an on-demand model, a very simple and logical model that looks at software as a utility, software that is pulled into our operational environment, software that we use and we pay only for the amount that we use and no more. We have 3 distinct categories, and these are software as a service, platform as a service, and the infrastructure as a service. So, what does that imply? That we don't really have this upfront cost burden that companies had in the past in buying and positioning an enterprise system. It's very much like utilities such as water and lights. The more you use, the more you pay for. The less you use, the less you pay for. So this does dramatically impact on things like return on investment. So the cloud return on investment, something that every financial manager, every business owner, every COO looks at. Well, related research by the group Nucleus showed that cloud computing, 1.7 times more ROI than on-premise applications. Now that is a significant number. And if you are one of those small to medium enterprises trying to make things happen and trying to make things work in terms of the economics, that is a good excuse to switch your infrastructure directly to cloud. So what's out there? What's out there at the moment in terms of knowledge, in terms of how we go and get that information and how we use it? Well, what is out there is something we call big data. Big data is the focus of many, many research institutions, many, many marketing companies, and big data has a big potential. The tsunami that I mentioned probably will come in the form of big data. According to Forrester, big data, techniques and technologies that make capturing value from data at extreme scale economical. We recognize there is a lot of data out there. In that data, we have useful data. But in the past, the computing infrastructure and power needed to process this data has been prohibitive. But as we progress with ICT, information and communication technologies and computing, this becomes feasible now. Big data growth, according to IBM, some very interesting figures. Every day we generate 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. In other words, that is 2.5 times 10 to the power of 18. If that didn't alarm us, let me give you another piece of information. 90% of all the knowledge in the world today in the form of data was generated in the last 2 years. In other words, there is a lot of information out there. And if we don't use that information to drive new paradigms in enterprise systems and others, then we are going to miss the trick. Big data is huge, but we do not use big data a lot. Is big data attracting attention? It is, in certain areas. For example, in government. This is a quote from the Financial Times of last month. And this is something that we report back from the UK Chief Operating Officer for government, in other words, for the company government of the UK. Big data, it's a key part of a strategy to shave off 20 billion of the 140 billion spent each year on things that include information technology and things like telecoms, etc. So for every year, taking off 20 billion off that budget of 140. And that's not all. He quotes a very interesting figure in his article, that in the past, where they would have procured a 300 million pound enterprise system, they can do the same job and replace it with a cloud-based system at 1/10 of the cost. 1/10 of the cost of that. That's a huge saving. But that is also something that we look at now, and we say, you know, that is a huge savings from a captive client. Typically governments use big enterprise systems. They are captive clients of these big vendors. At the moment, they would have lost that client. Also, there is a myth that enterprise systems are indispensable. It's hugely strategic. We start looking at it now as people in governments in order to cut their spending budgets, and other people in big companies look at other ways of delivering value. So, in summary, we've looked at cloud computing. In general, we've identified some of the current issues which allow us to build on new paradigms. We've reviewed how ERP systems enable things like open innovation, and we've looked at how some stakeholders that use these enterprise systems can collaborate more effectively and share knowledge and work closely together in order to be competitive. So in conclusion, we are forever continuously striving to find new ways. We're looking for fusions between information technologies, information sciences, information communication technologies, in order to be able to have enterprises that are more competitive. As you know, this is a very global environment where we have supply chains that have huge overheads, like costs associated with information systems. Those companies that don't have such costs will be more agile. They'll be able to be more successful, and they will be able to be the innovators of tomorrow. So, in closing, this knowledge, we need to attain it through being agile, being open, and being collaborative. Thank you very much.